That's
You're not responsible. Oh
no! That's the Holy Grail piece that's coming home from Japan.
This looks like a totally normal neighborhood. Birds whistling, manicured lawns, 2-car garages. But
there was an earthquake that hit the area, and so I came home.
Behind that door right there, there's a hidden bookshelf with a secret wine cellar packed floor to ceiling, Star Wars, Spidey, and about 100 versions of one Autobot named Jazz. This is the home of Carbon Scoring, one of the most obsessive, curated toy collections we've ever seen.
Recreating my childhood is a huge part of what this is all about.
And the neighbors, they have no idea what's going on in this house.
All right, so tell me, what is Carbon Scoring?
During the pandemic, we were all looking for something to do, and I started buying 3D printed spaceships online. Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers, that type of stuff. And those 3D printed plastics don't really look that good. You've got to kind of gussy them up a little bit. And so I was doing some customizing. I was adding some streaking, some battle damage to them. And I was shipping the pictures over to my brother, and he said, hey, you should make a YouTube channel of you customizing these spaceships and call it Carbon Scoring. I said, nah, I don't have time for all of that. So we got together at my mom's for Christmas, and he brings it back up again. I'm like, no, absolutely not. He goes home that night, goes on YouTube, registers the channel, and says, Merry Christmas. Now you have a YouTube channel.
Tell us where we're going.
So this is the old wine cellar in my house that my kids refer to as the secret lounge. It's where I keep like the very best of my collection. And when I put in all of the custom shelving down there, I had a special secret bookshelf door installed. So you would have no idea if it was here unless you saw it. So let's crack it open and take a look.
When did you start collecting as an adult?
You know, the line that probably would be the start of my adult collecting was the Toy Biz Famous Covers line. They were the 9-inch cloth costumed figures that were hearkening back to the Mego figures that I had as a really young kid. But it was one that was really exciting. It was something that lit up the early days of toy message boards. And that was probably the first time that I really was, I am going to collect every single figure in this line. So the idea when you come in is that you have these packaged figures. Most of them are toys from the 80s. So it's meant to kind of represent what it was like to walk into Toys R Us back in the day and see just a wall of figures all the way around you.
Can I ask you where the wine is?
It's my belly. Well, it's kind of a funny story because I had this wine cellar and I drink wine. I like wine, but I don't collect wine. And I was at a friend's house and he had just put in a wine cellar. And this guy, he's kind of a flat personality. And so I asked him to see his wine cellar. I know. And we go down there and he just explodes with personality. He's so passionate about this vintage and this collection. And I'm standing there and I said, that guy needs a wine cellar. I need an action figure display room. And so I came home and started building it.
Love that.
Yeah.
So no wine here.
No wine down here.
Oh, okay.
Just
there is
plastic.
wine.
Do you give yourself a budget when you go toy hunting?
I take cash to some of those. And when the cash is gone, it's gone. And I had a pretty firm budget in Japan when we were toy hunting for vintage stuff. And I stuck to that. As a kid, I was a huge skater and I wasn't very good, but I loved it. And my childhood skateboard was the Lance Mountain, but the Bones Brigade, the greatest skaters of all the 1980s, Tony Hawk, Mike McGill, Steve Caballero. I have these reproduction decks from the Search for Animal Chin era. And so they're all right here. And then Super 7 actually has made figures of the Bones Brigade with kind of their deck logos as the packaging. So really kind of brings a lot of my childhood together with this.
Was there a specific moment, a toy or cartoon that made you realize this is going to be a lifelong obsession?
Yeah, I think in kindergarten, when the Star Wars toys came out, there's a gene that some of us have that when it gets clicked on, it's on. And I had R2-D2. And I remember this kid in my kindergarten class would talk every day about how he had all 12 Star Wars figures. I still remember that all these years later, him having all 12 Star Wars figures, and I didn't. I never did, actually. I never had them as a kid. But that flipped that switch of, yeah, I want that. I need to get all of them. And once that switch is on, I think it's just on. The first thing that you see when you come downstairs is the entire vintage Star Wars collection in a specially made display case in release order. It has the look of the original card backs with their names behind each one of the figures. And it's just an opportunity for this collection to really shine.
Who's your favorite character?
So definitely, bar none, my favorite Star Wars toy from my childhood is the Bespin Luke. You know, that Empire Strikes Back is still my favorite Star Wars movie. And this was Luke's main look in that. And that is the Luke from my childhood. Some of these I had to pick up later in life, but that is the original Luke that I had.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, he's a little worse for wear, but not to me. I would much rather have a played with Luke in this collection than a pristine Met copy. And I have that paired with a new set, one of the newer things down here in my collection of the vintage Kenner vehicle line. And, you know, each one of them has a specialty hook so that they're all standing up against the wall. So it's a pretty cool use of space to get all of those vehicles into one small area. And the brick was obviously here, you know, as part of the old wine cellar. And so I really wanted to preserve that because I think it gives the space a lot more character. Some of my earliest toys were space Legos. This was actually the very first space Lego set that I had back in like 1979. And then of course it grew. And this is most of the classic Lego space collection from 79 to 87 or so. I'll let you hold that one.
Oh no.
No, they're okay.
I didn't want to be responsible for this.
Well, I keep breaking them, so.
So you're not responsible. Oh no.
This is why everything is kind of in its one particular spot.
It definitely is a museum.
Yeah, that was kind of the I still wanted it to kind of, like, I didn't want it overpacked. Mm-hmm. And I know that's insane with what we're sitting here looking at, but. So some of my favorite modern Lego sets were when they came back out with a brand new version of the Galaxy Explorer. You can see it had the call sign of LL928, and Lego made a completely modern version of this. But if you bought 3 different sets, you could actually replicate the other Lego ships from the late 70s and early 80s, and they're just absolutely fantastic.
Can you put all of these together?
I did. You had to go online. There was like a QR code where you could get the alternate instructions to build the other versions of the models. And then I found custom badges for them so that they actually matched the previous sets.
What is the most rare piece you have in here?
Probably nothing. You know, Lego makes a lot of toys. Maybe this one. This may be the most rare piece that I have. It's actually a micro version of the Galaxy Explorer, but you could only get it if you bought a specific book about Lego space. So it was like included with the set. Recreating my childhood is a huge part of what this is all about. You know that I love Lego, but one of the problems with Lego is it's really big. It takes up so much space. And these Ultimate Collector Series ships are massive, but this circular display in the middle of the room really allows me to kind of have them all out so that, you know, we can see them and enjoy them. The Millennium Falcon, this is the original version from the early 2000s. I think I want to say around 2006. And when I built this monster, I had nowhere to put it, but there was no way that it was going to get taken apart. Like once it was together, it was staying together. So having this space down here really was one of the big reasons for setting up the Secret Lounge in the first place, was to give this guy a home. And then that's expanded with all of the different versions of the ships that they've made. And I tend to focus on the ships from the original trilogy because that's still my heart and soul Star Wars movies. And they've really kind of filled that collection in very, very nicely. I do love X-Wing fighters. X-Wing fighters are my favorite spaceship of all time. And so this is like the 3rd Ultimate Collector Series X-Wing that they've made. And it just is, I think it has the best proportions out of any of them so far. This fell and like shattered into a million pieces. So, you know, the problem is it doesn't go back together the same way that it went the first time. You're trying to kind of piece it all together. But I put it back together and I had like 4 extra leftover pieces. And I'm like, good enough. That's no one's going to know. We got it back.
That would stress me out.
It was terrible.
I'd probably burn it at that point.
It was loud, because it comes off the top. I mean, it just million pieces everywhere. My family comes running down. They're like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I'm like, "No." It was so bad.
I think I'd be sitting on the floor crying.
Oh, it was so bad. It was so bad.
Real quick, I have to thank today's sponsor, Anker's Ultra Slim Magnetic Power Bank. This little thing snaps right onto my phone and keeps it charged all day, which is crucial because I use my phone to ask questions, take notes, and look up prices constantly when we film. Whether I'm fact-checking Matt or pulling up a list of rare variants mid-interview, if my phone dies, I'm screwed. But this battery is a beast. It's sleek, magnetic. It doesn't budge when I'm juggling toys, gears, and 3 cans of ghost energy. Big thanks to Anker for keeping me powered up during the chaos.
I loved the movie The Black Hole when it came out. And, this is virtually every black hole figure that's ever been produced. The Giant Vincent was a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive from like 2005. But one of my most valuable pieces in the entire collection is right here. The old Bob figure from the second wave of the Black Hole series. Black Hole as a movie didn't really do very well, and Mego, who was trying to replicate the success of Star Wars, was buying up every science fiction license. So they tried to put out figures for Black Hole, but it kind of bombed, and so the second series got dumped in Italy, and they're incredibly rare and difficult to find. But my wife and I were on vacation in Florence, Italy just a few months ago, and I found a vintage toy shop that had one. The old Bob from the Black Hole line was more like 900 euros. It's a nice piece. Yeah.
Okay, so you go to Italy with your wife and you say, "Hey, there's a vintage toy store here." What's her response?
So we had a great day. We had been to a museum. We had like a nice 2-hour lunch. We'd been really busy. And she wanted to go back to the room and take a nap. And I said, "That sounds great. I'm going to catch an Uber and go out to the suburbs and hit this toy store."
So she didn't go with you?
She did not go with me.
So every trip, do you have some sort of mission that you're on?
Mostly no. Because that's the separation of church and state, right? Trying to, but this was one where I knew that was such a rare piece and that there was the chance that I could find it in Italy. So I did a little homework and was able to find it. We had a long conversation about the history of this figure before I went after it. And she was incredibly supportive. She knew that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity and that the story of getting it was as valuable as the figure itself. So she was all in on it.
She asked you the price?
Yeah. And I have a buddy who says, my biggest nightmare is that if something happens to me, my wife sells my collection for what I told her I paid for it.
Do you have any friends that are big fans of Black Hole, or do you feel like...
I don't know anyone who's a big fan of Black Hole. Like, I think I'm the only one. It's probably why I have as many figures as I do, because nobody else really wants them. When I got there, it was an incredible shop. They had so many of the things, the American toys that had been dumped in Italy and in Europe in the 1980s. And I went with that one piece in mind. And they had an incredible collection of European exclusive Starcom toys that I really wanted, but I knew what I was there for. I got it. And I was just like a kid on Christmas when I brought it back. This is a toy line that I think is really underappreciated. This is Starcom from Coleco. And so Coleco is not somebody that you really think of as a major toy manufacturer, but they worked with NASA to put together designs that were, kind of accurate. That has sort of a space shuttle look to it. But the gimmick is all of the characters have magnets on their feet, and all of the mechanisms of these toys are activated by the magnets. So you can, and they have sort of wind up features, and the mechanisms, because there was no batteries that they used, still work on most of these. The cockpits will open, the wings will fold out. It was just a line that was way ahead of its time and just really, really underappreciated. These are kind of my original G1 Transformers. There's a couple of GoBots snuck in there, but Jazz was my first, and you never forget your first. And so that has led to me trying to collect virtually every version of Jazz that's ever been made. And thankfully, I picked a good one because he's a really cool character, and they actually do make a ton of different Jazz figures, including some of these relatively modern model kits that don't transform, but have that just great robot look. But it's amazing. Even ones as small as this figure will actually transform. So it's the technology of Transformers is just so off the charts, especially compared to what we grew up with. But I love that red, white, and blue Porsche. Jazz is my guy.
Do you know Jazz's motto?
Oh, no, I don't.
Okay, I feel like it relates to everything I saw down there.
Oh my gosh, what is it?
This is embarrassing. I'm teaching you something.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Do it with style or don't do it at all.
Okay, that's awesome.
Right?
So I have tried to do this with style.
How do you feel like you relate to Jazz?
God, I really kind of don't. Well, okay. So my senior year at Clemson, I actually took a class on the history of jazz. It's really one of America's only true, unique, original art forms. And, it's kind of our musical heritage. So it's really cool that the coolest Transformer, ties into America's musical history as well.
All right. So my favorite Ninja Turtle is Leonardo, which is pretty much everyone's least favorite.
Okay.
But that kind of makes it easy to toy hunt.
Right.
Is Jazz popular? Is he hard to find? Are they making a lot of them?
Jazz is pretty popular, which is great because that means he tends to get included in all the different lines of Transformers. Like if you were somebody whose favorite character was some really obscure Transformer, it might be fun because every single one would be like a holy grail, but it's a lot easier to collect a popular character because there's just so many more options for it. He's active in the new Transformers comic, the Energon Universe Transformers comic from Robert Kirkman, the creator of Invincible, has got the license to G.I. Joe and Transformers, and Jazz is definitely Optimus's right-hand man in that series. I'm somebody who still reads comics, and it's that history of comics that really kind of informs all of this collection. And so when you can get a custom head that really represents the artist's style that you're going for, like your favorite Todd McFarlane or your favorite Steve Ditko Spider-Man head, the big companies don't necessarily make those, but the customizers out there are putting out incredible stuff.
That's why you wanted to collect every version?
Yeah. Well, there's something wrong with us, right? Like, if you're in this room and you see all this, there's clearly something that's off, in my brain. But it kind of started I got a few jazzes. And then, as new lines would come out, I'm not buying every Transformer, but I'll pick up the jazz. And then the next thing it's a display, and then it becomes a really big display. So that completionist aspect just takes over at some point, and you just got to catch them all.
So wait, are you done or is there more to...
You're never done. That's the problem.
With jazz specifically?
Oh, no, you're never done. There's
Okay.
always actually have one on pre-order that's supposed to come like in the next week. Yeah, you're never done with a collection. It's always growing
Catch
and
us next
evolving.
week.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's always growing, always evolving. There's always that next figure. You think that you have the very best one, and then somebody makes something even better.
Is there a story that's happening on... I know how you have kind of storylines going on. Is there storylines here?
Yeah, definitely here. So these would be my childhood Transformers, and you can see Jazz is obviously in the center. He has Prowl to his left and Wheeljack to his right. And these are kind of the original 80s versions. And then as the masterpiece versions have come out, this shelf gets replicated up higher with the characters in mostly the same order, but you can see just what an incredible growth the technology of these toys has had, going from a side swipe that looks like this to one that looks like that. It's just remarkable what they're able to do with all of these, even particularly Optimus Prime. That original Optimus Prime was a cool toy, but really limited in its shape. It looked absolutely nothing like the cartoon. And now you get something that looks like this, that literally stepped right off of the screen, but can still transform. It's just mind-blowing what they're able to do with this.
How often are you changing up this shelf specifically? Are you adding to it still?
These are pretty set. And part of that is because it is meant to sort of replicate my original childhood collection. So as I've pretty well filled in these gaps, these are pretty good. The Jazz shelf, obviously constantly evolving. If we go all the way up here to the top and you have the Iron Man armory, they are never going to stop making Iron Man figures. So that armory kind of continues to move in and out. So I really do kind of view my secret lounge as a museum. It's meant to kind of highlight the best of my collection. And there's certain things down there that are never going to not be on display. The Superpowers collection, the vintage Star Wars collection. Those are what I consider permanent exhibits. They're always going to be down there. Unfortunately, as a kid, I didn't have the biggest toy collection. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I'm as insane as I am right now. But particularly through here, this is the 80s come to life with the complete collection of Kenner's Superpowers line. And that includes the really difficult to find Cyborg figure with his vac metal back there. But as much as I love DC, and I do love DC and their characters, I've always been a Marvel guy. And so this lineup of all of the Secret Wars figures is just so great. And of course, if you're going to have a Marvel lineup, Captain America really does need to be front and center. And of course, he's flanked by the 2 versions of Spider-Man that they made. But Secret Wars is another one of those lines that really didn't get the love that it deserved back when it first came out, but I think it's gaining more and more popularity now. Mego, the people who made the 8-inch cloth costume dolls, also made some really cool 3 3/4 inch figures. Now, they had the rights to both DC and Marvel. So you get a toy line that has the Joker with the Hulk, that has Superman with Spider-Man, and they're minimally articulated. You get a little bit at the waist and at the shoulders, and the original ones are all in this sort of squat position, but they just are really fun and super nostalgic. This lineup is actually some of the oldest figures in my collection. These are the Captain Action figures from 1966. So Hasbro had G.I. Joe, and you could turn him into a Marine or a sailor. So Ideal Toy Company said, hey, let's get our own guy, but he can turn into different superheroes. And so they actually produced costumes for everybody you see here. Anyone from Aquaman to Spider-Man. That's actually the first true Spider-Man action figure that was made, was the Captain Action figure from 1966 or 1968. They really have that cool, like, vintage look to them. And those cloth costumes just sort of bring out that nostalgic flavor. But these are super cool older figures.
It definitely has that costume with a little elastic on the back.
It kind of feels like they're about to go trick-or-treating in like 1976. Yeah, they look really cool.
Yeah, that is really cool.
But a lot of the rest gets moved in and out because that's the only real way to enjoy the different lines and figures that I collect. And also, as the hobby grows and more things come out, you want to kind of showcase new things. Nostalgia really drives everything down here. So much of this is like rebuilding those great childhood memories that I had. And one of the most specific ones was of Star Blazers, which in Japan was called Space Battleship Yamato. This was an anime series that came out in the early 70s that told like a soap opera-esque story. It built on itself over time. And it was shown in the US once in like 1979, 1980 when I was in first grade. And so I would come home from school, I would go to my grandparents' house, and this came on, and I have been in love with it ever since. And so I've tried to put together kind of the best Star Blazers collection possible. And a couple of years ago, we were able to take a family trip to Japan. And my whole focus when I was doing vintage toy hunting and searching around was to fill in gaps of my Space Battleship Yamato collection. So some of these die-cast battleships were ones that I picked up on that trip. I think I filled in the last gap of my Safubi collection of the main characters. But this is a collection that really means a ton to me because it just takes me all the way back to first grade instantly.
Yeah. So what was it like hunting for this in Japan?
Oh, so amazing, because this is still revered. You'll go into toy shops and they'll have huge posters of Yamato. And so it wasn't too hard to find things. Some of the stuff is really quite expensive. These figures came out in 1979, and I actually got those from a collector out of Atlanta. But the model kits that came out in the 70s are really, really valued collectibles, and they're kind of hard to find. But I wanted to focus on sort of some of the oddball things, like this wind-up robot was one that I found, and it kind of It has the moving feet. It's just so cool. And I was able to find like 3 different colors. Actually, yep, there you go.
Just gonna let it run.
Actually, the coolest piece that I found was this one. Again, this is the soft vinyl figure of the robot called IQ-9 or Analyzer, but this was the first mass-produced toy for Space Battleship Yamato in the early 70s. And I was in a vintage shop, and I saw it back in the back of the display, and I kind of almost lost my mind. Yeah, he just was stuck in the back of a display with 1,000 other things, but I immediately saw it. My eye went right to it, and I knew, yep, that's the Holy Grail piece that's coming home from Japan with me.
What was the price tag on this guy? Do you remember?
Like less than $10.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the thing about collecting. It's never really about the price. It's about the find.
Yeah.
And it's the value of this, so that was worth $10 in that shop. But to me, it's priceless.
Yeah.
Because it really helps to complete this entire collection.
I've seen so many videos of like Japan and their toy stores. I've heard that that's somewhere that we need to go.
Oh, it's just so much fun. And they have so much variety in there, and it's really accepted. You will see little kids, you'll see 70-year-olds, like everybody's into it. And it's just a great culture for that.
I like that because I feel like it's going to die here, with kids because we don't have like the same, selections in the toy stores.
Yeah, I worry about that. My kids don't play with toys at all. They really only play video games. But I wonder, though, that they'll have that same nostalgia like I have for this. They'll have that nostalgia for
Roblox?
Video games. And yeah, sure, Minecraft. There's probably a huge Minecraft opportunity coming in about 20 years.
I could see Minecraft, but my son's really into Roblox as well as Minecraft. So
Okay, all right. Not the worst. Yeah.
But not the best.
Yeah. The vintage lines tend to stay because they're set. They're kind of a specific place in time. So they're finished and they look really good together. But the new lines that are constantly evolving, I do like to kind of bring those in and out, just particularly as my interests change. I've been collecting a lot of the Transformers 86 movie series, and I can really foresee a time when I get that collection to a point that it gets a temporary display for a couple of years down there, and then it kind of moves in and out.
But never Spidey. Spidey's not moving.
No, Spidey's not moving. Now, the Spidey display changes, and like the Spider-Verse display, obviously there's new figures in that, but that entire display was completely redone within the last 6 months. So the fun for me is actually getting them into good poses, getting them into a good spot, and the storytelling. I want each one of those shelves to tell a different story. Modern superhero figures really kind of exploded in the 90s because of Toy Biz. Toy Biz started with their X-Men figures and then took it to the entire Marvel universe. And I just love the like bubblegum candy colors of this display. It just feels so bright and so fun. And there are still figures in this 90s Toy Biz line that haven't been made in Marvel Legends. There's Gorgon. He hasn't been made yet. A classic Wizard and a classic Blastar. Both of those came from the Fantastic Four line. So they still haven't been able to match everything that we saw from Toy Biz, but it's really just the explosion of color that I think makes these shelves look so good. My philosophy definitely has changed. It's hard to believe when you see the volume of the collection that I have, but I've really actually tried to dial down to really focus on lines, characters, figures that have some type of meaning to me. And unfortunately, that includes the entire Marvel universe. But, there are lines like Power Rangers or Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters is an incredibly popular line with a lot of people, but I don't have an emotional attachment to that. And so I really haven't gone down that rabbit hole. I've tried to focus on things that really have internal meaning to me. Marvel Legends really kind of changed everything with action figures, right? The incredible detail, the great sculpting, the articulation, and they make for such really cool displays. And because the line's been going for 25 years, you can put together your ultimate X-Men display, your ultimate Avengers display with just a wealth of characters. I try to not have like 50 Wolverines in here because you could fill up this entire place just with Wolverine figures. But for my X-Men display, it's basically 3 displays in one. The center of the display is the all new, all different X-Men from the late 1970s. And then on this side, you have the original X-Men, and then Havoc and Polaris, the ones that kind of led into the new X-Men. And then on this side, you have the Jim Lee era X-Men. So it sort of creates a really great collection of all of the different X-Men, but the different eras are showcased in it. Of course, you've got the big 3 right up front with Thor, Cap, and Iron Man. Hulk, an original Avenger, gets there as well. And then there's a lot of different Hank Pyms with his Goliath look, with his Ant-Man look, and of course the Ant-Man where he actually goes from regular size. And then I used some of the different smaller versions to show him kind of shrinking down in that display.
What's a display idea that you stole from someone else?
So the Ant-Man in my Avengers display, where I used the figures in slightly larger scale until you got up to the 6-inch figure. I saw that online and I'm like, I absolutely have got to steal that. It's so good. That one's coming home with me. I really think the G.I. Joe Classified is probably one of the best action figure lines that's on shelves right now. I mean, there are no other lines that are giving us vehicles in this scale and this kind of diversity of characters. And as somebody who loved G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero as a kid, to actually get to see these in 6-inch form, super articulated, incredibly well sculpted, is just so much fun. The G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero line, it would be nothing if it weren't for the vehicles. I mean, that was the thing that set the play value of G.I. Joe apart from everything else. And so, that Rattler, the Tomahawk helicopter, being able to go on missions around your house or around your yard with your Joes is the thing that really just set this line completely apart.
Did you watch the G.I. Joe cartoon as a kid?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When the original miniseries came out, we set the VCR to tape, the mass device and the Weather Dominator episodes. And I guarantee you, we wore those VHS tapes out, playing them over and over again. This shelf here is more of the 82, 83 Joes, the first ones that I got. So it's a little bit more of kind of the original ones. G.I. Joe is absolutely one of my favorite toys of my childhood, and most of these are my original Joes. Now, I've had to go through and replace their O-rings and kind of get them cleaned up, but this collection of G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, is just so great. I saved up like from chores to buy the G.I. Joe headquarters as a kid. Actually, the Vamp with Clutch was my very first G.I. Joe toy, and this is all the original stuff that I had all the way back in like 1983, still right here. But this is the complete set of 82, 83 Joes with a couple of 84s sprinkled in. Cobra's High Command exists right here with Cobra Commander and Destro and all of sort of the leaders of Cobra. And of course, you've got the amazing HasLab Hiss Tank sitting here sort of grounding the whole thing. The Cobras are really cool, and most of these I actually picked up at Retro Toy Con over the past few years to kind of fill in the gaps of some of my Cobra collection, but they're just so amazing when you have people like Raptor, the Cobra's, bird instructor, like Crystal Ball with his like hypnotic disc. But I think where G.I. Joe really goes beyond everybody else is the zany characters that are all associated with Cobra. I mean, you've got Big Boa, who's their boxing trainer, and Crocmaster with a giant 6-inch scale crocodile, Zartan and all of his dreadnoughts. This is the thing that kind of makes G.I. Joe different from everything else, is just, it does have that sci-fi aspect. It does have the ninja aspect, but then you get just this wealth of characters that Hasbro's done an incredible job of bringing to us in 6 inches. Snake Eyes, particularly this version of Snake Eyes, is my favorite. My grandparents bought me my very first comic book, and it was G.I. Joe issue 16, and I immediately got a subscription to it. And the first book that came in my subscription was G.I. Joe 21, the silent issue. And like most kids, I thought it was broken. I opened the book up and there's no words. There's just pictures all the way through. And I thought, oh man, I got like a bum deal. But it ends up being like the most famous comic book of the entire 1980s.
Do you have that?
I do. And I actually got it signed at Joe Fest by Larry Hama a couple of years ago. And then at Heroes, just recently, Steve Laialahola, who did the finished art on the book, actually did a sketch cover for me of Snake Eyes on a blank cover of G.I. Joe 21.
So where do you display your comics?
They are mostly organized and put away up in drawer boxes. I do kind of keep my portfolios of original art kind of in my office. I would be remiss if we didn't bring up the figure of William the Refrigerator Perry, who, just like me, went to Clemson University. So he's the only Clemson Tiger that I know of that's a G.I. Joe, but glad to have the fridge in the collection. Still hoping to get him in the G.I. Joe Classified line.
Okay, I didn't see one, nor do I think it would fit down there. But did you or do you have the USS Flagg?
I obviously didn't have a flag as a kid. I mean, that was kind of an amazing sort of thing, but I do have a flag. Yeah. And I have a storage unit, which is really deep. And so I've got an 8-foot table with my flag set up in my storage unit. My kids just aren't as into action figures as I had always hoped that they would be. But for about 7.3 seconds, they showed some interest in G.I. Joe. And I just immediately went crazy. And I found a flag online and got it. And we actually set it up in the kids' playroom. And it was there for a couple of months, but it's 8 feet long. And it just was taking up all the space. And so it eventually went back into storage. And so as the YouTube channel has grown and as I've added so much more to my collection, I had to get a storage unit to store all the things that I don't have on display. So it gave me the opportunity to actually get the flag back out, set it up, and at least let me go and see and visit it when I go to my storage unit.
Not only was it an expensive toy, but you had to have the real estate for it.
The only person that I knew growing up that had it was my roommate in grad school. And he had it because he had 3 brothers and they all collected G.I. Joe. So it was kind of a community gift for all 3 of them. And he was not from some wealthy family. I mean, he grew up in the same neighborhood that I did, but they actually did have the flag as kids.
When you go to like a show and you find that toy that you kind of weren't expecting to find, and then you go on eBay and find it.
It is so much more fun finding a figure out in the wild, like actually being at a convention, talking to people, interacting, like bringing the community back and then finding something that you want. It's so sterile buying things off of eBay. I mean, you can get anything that you want. I could purchase every single one of these today off of eBay if I wanted to, but it's so much more fun to go on the hunt and particularly finding these vintage toys. Just nothing beats that. There's a fair amount of stuff here that has come off of eBay, but I live in Greenville, South Carolina, and so we have the best retro toy shop in the entire world right here in our hometown. So having access to Toy Federation and being able to go and talk with the guys, we have an incredible convention every year in the fall. And that's where I've actually really pieced together a lot of the vintage stuff that I have. I grew up in a time where it was pre-internet. And so you just had to go to the stores and hope that you could find the figures that you were looking for. And there was a community sense to that. There was something much more exciting when you would turn the corner and go down the toy aisle and see that figure that you were wanting. It was so exciting. And we've lost a lot of that. My toy shop is my front step because that's where everything just gets delivered these days. And so you lose the action of collecting because of that.
I would imagine, though, when you get it and you do unbox it and then you put it on the shelf where it belongs, it kind of floods back that nostalgia. Whereas, like, you would probably normally, if you're at a convention and you find it, it would flood you right then and there.
It does. The dopamine hits in different ways. Yeah. You get it every time. But there is something really, really cool about the hunt and the find. It can't be beat.
What does your wife think about your collection down here?
My wife is a little bit of a collector as well. We have that gene in common. She's trying to make it to every national park in the U.S. So she has that collect them all kind of thing. She doesn't ever come down here. This is sort of my private space, but she's been incredibly supportive of all of this.
Yeah. And then whenever you bring a guest here, what's their reaction?
Yeah, their eyes get about this big. You know, it just is mind blowing. My brother won't even come down here. He says there's just too many eyes. It bothers him. But one of the most common comments that I've gotten when I have brought people down here is they'll come up to me a week or two later and they're like, "Hey man, thanks. My wife doesn't think my stuff is crazy anymore."
Do people outside of collecting in your world see the secret lounge? And if so, what is their response to it?
They do. And it's usually shock. You know, it's usually just because they had no idea that any of this stuff existed. And so at first they're just overwhelmed by the look of all of it. But then as they spend a little time down there, it's the same thing that happens every time. It's like, "Oh, I remember that." Or, "Oh, I loved that movie." Or, "Oh, that looks just exactly like Christopher Reeve and Superman." They'll find something, even if they're not in the world of collecting, even if they're not fans of superheroes or sci-fi, there's something down there that gets back to their childhood that triggers that nostalgia for them. And they find something that they connect with down there. Isn't that exciting when somebody gets it?
Yeah.
When like the masses get why we like this stuff, like they see it and they're like, "Oh no, this is really awesome." It's kind of like what happened with the MCU. It's like we let everybody in.
Yeah.
Like we've had this for a long time.
Yeah.
It's been awesome for a long time, but it's really great to get to share it with everybody. I'm pretty interested to see where this collection of DC figures goes because, as everybody knows, McFarlane has had the DC toy license for the last few years and has produced a ton of figures, but is now switching back over to Mattel, who made this collection of DC Universe Classics. So these are all DC figures in 6-inch scale. And it'll be interesting to see if they go back to this look and sort of build on this collection from the early 2000s. There's some pretty super rare ones in here, beginning with Zan and Jaina. They were San Diego Comic-Con exclusives, but you could get the Wonder Twins themselves online after the show. But the only way that you could get Gleek was if you were at Comic-Con that year. I wasn't there, so I got one off of eBay. But it's a pretty rare set.
The only way.
Unless
there's eBay.
Unless you just spend however much money it takes to do that.
Do you think you're preserving pop culture?
I do. I really do think so. I was actually kind of spending some time just scrolling back through some of the videos that I've made, and I'm actually pretty pleased with some of the stories that I've been able to tell with that because of trying to combine comics history with the action figures. You know, I have decades and decades of figures that I've collected. And then when you pair that with the stories behind them, I think it does create an archive of this era. The YouTube journey is really a pretty fascinating one. I actually tried to do some homework, looking at best practices because I wanted to be successful. I knew that to really kind of connect with the audience, I needed to bring something different. And there's so many great YouTube channels out there that review action figures. They do a way better job of explaining the what of action figures. What is it? What does it do? What is the articulation? So I knew I had to do something different. And so I've always tried to focus on the why. Why do we care? What are the emotional connections to this? What are the backstories? What does this toy represent? And why does it mean something to us? And so I think that the audience kind of connected with that pretty early. And so I was very fortunate that the channel grew pretty consistently, even at the beginning, because you needed that positive feedback because it's a lonely thing. You are sitting in your closet with a computer and your iPhone trying to create something, and you have no idea if anybody's ever going to see it. And so fortunately, I was really lucky that people kind of picked up right from the beginning. I got some positive feedback, and that was enough to keep me going. I've been pretty lucky on negative feedback. I really don't get into too many controversial topics, and I'm not picking fights with other YouTubers, but you do just kind of have to take it for what it is and recognize how the internet behaves. Far and away, my favorite negative feedback that I've gotten is I do have kind of stubby little fingers and my hands are in all of the videos. And so somebody left a comment and it just said, "baby fingers." And my family has cracked up over that. We laugh about that all the time. They'll just look at me and go, "baby fingers." This set of the Legion of Superheroes was another Comic-Con exclusive. I think there was like 10 or 12 figures in like a giant gift pack. And they did such a great job because they really did put new sculpts and new characters into all of these. But Mattel really built out an incredible DC universe. Even the villain figures with guys like, Killer Moth. I mean, they went deep with this line. It's really, really good stuff.
This one looks kind of like more modern, I would say.
He does. Is his name Tiger Shark or Killer Shark or something? I don't even know who he is, but. And then this one's really cool, the Gentleman Ghost, because the way that they did the collar, it makes it appear as if his hat and his monocle are just floating.
I love that.
So really cool sculpting on that one.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like the monocle a lot.
The 6-inch figures from Batman the Animated Series, and it covers both the second version of the cartoon and figures from the first version. These were originally through DC Direct and were really only available in comic shops, but luckily McFarlane has started re-releasing some of these and then adding Build-A-Figures. Like the Condiment King is a relatively new Build-A-Figure piece that came with all of these, but they just so perfectly capture the style of the animated series. I mean, it really does look like they walked right off of the screen. When you have memories of coming home after school and watching that cartoon, it's just absolutely shaped into your mind. And so when you can get something that perfectly replicates your memories, it just brings back all of that nostalgia. I think that one of the things that collecting teaches you about yourself is the value of perseverance, the stick-to-itiveness, the ability to stay focused and see something all the way through. If you're just starting your collection, you don't need to look at somebody else's collection and think, I'll never have that. It takes time. You should get things that you love and that you're passionate about. If you love Spider-Man, you should get a Spider-Man figure and cherish it, because you're going to get more. It's going to grow. But what you should do is always stay in the moment of your collection. Enjoy the ones that you have. One of the reasons why I have this big a collection is because I loved those few figures that I had as a kid so much. I have spent so much time playing with Bespin Luke from the Star Wars line, playing from Clutch from G.I. Joe, playing with Jazz from the Transformers. It's the love of the figures that I had when I only had a handful of figures that has allowed this thing to grow and spread into what it is. So you always want to stay in the moment that you're in with your collection. You don't want to be jealous of what other people have. Love and cherish the stuff that you have, and it's going to grow with you. From what I have heard, huge Spidey fan. I am a huge Spidey fan. Spider-Man is by far my favorite hero. And so the true centerpiece of the collection is the Spider-Man display. And there's different levels to all of it. You have kind of a hodgepodge of larger figures and smaller figures up here, including the super cool Mighty Mugs, which are another vastly underrated line. The first villain shelf is dedicated solely to villains that were created by Spidey's co-creator, Steve Ditko. So every villain on this shelf appeared in the first 38 issues of Amazing Spider-Man. And I've got some pretty cool customs in here of Crime Master. In the back, you can see J. Jonah Jameson as a Spider Slayer. And then over on this far side, you have the Enforcers. Now, I'm hopeful that we'll get figures of these at some point in the Marvel Legends line, but for now, this is a pretty comprehensive collection of Ditko villains. This next shelf is meant to represent Spidey's evolution over time. So each one of these represents the artwork of a different Spidey artist as we move along. So you begin with the Amazing Fantasy 15 Spider-Man from his original, his first issue. In fact, this one is the one that has the miscolored blue spider logo on the back that only happened in that very first issue. And then you move into the era of Steve Ditko, followed by John Romita, get into the 80s, and of course, the incredible work of Todd McFarlane. And then you start to see some of the other artists that have worked on Spider-Man, such as J. Scott Campbell and Umberto Ramos and Ryan Stegman. But even though each one of these is Spidey, they each kind of represent a different era in his history. The 5-inch Spidey line was really cool because they did some crazy things. You know, they have the Man Spider figure. You've got versions of some of Spidey's leading ladies like Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane. But probably out of this display, if you step back, the actual centerpiece of my entire Spidey display is this figure right here. It was called Spider Sense Spider-Man when it came out, and it's a little 5-inch figure. But this is the guy who was in my pocket on my wedding day. So he is always going to be a super special Spidey figure for me. I think that the Spider-Verse movies have been some of the absolute best representations of Spider-Man. And so with this display, I tried to go for a more dynamic look using some of these octopus stands so that you got kind of the main characters of the Spider-Verse sort of leaping out at you. There's a super fun spider buggy kind of floating around over here. And of course, in the back, I have the Japanese version of Spider-Man Leopardon, which I actually did pick that one up on my trip to Japan as well. So that came back from Japan and kind of anchors the backside of the entire Spider-Verse display.
What is your favorite version of Spider-Man?
I still like Teenage Spidey. I like the Peter that's figuring it out, that's learning his way, that doesn't have all the answers, but what he still has is that heart. Mm-hmm. He is going to do the right thing no matter what. So that's Spider-Man from issues 32 and 33, where he's trapped underneath all the wreckage and he's about to give up, but he knows that if he doesn't get that lifted off of him, he can't save Aunt May. That's like the ultimate expression of Spider-Man. He is faced with impossible odds, but he will not quit. He will always come through and do the right thing.
And what's your favorite Peter Parker in the movies?
I like Tom. I really think Tom has been incredible. He kind of captures that doofiness that Peter Parker has. You know, he's not supposed to be the coolest kid. There are a lot of Andrew Garfield fans out there, but Andrew was still a little bit too cool for me. And then Toby always felt maybe a little bit too old. So Tom is far and away my favorite Peter Parker.
Okay, so what camp do you fall in? Make the films as close to the comic as possible or tell a new story?
I think the best MCU movies have combined the heart of the comic stories, but they're able to take 60 years of history and condense it and pull out the best parts of all of it. Like, it doesn't really matter to me if it doesn't follow the comic storyline beat by beat. If you've got the heart of the character in there, that's what really matters. And I think the best ones have done that. They've taken the essence of Spider-Man, of Iron Man. There hasn't been an Iron Man movie that has followed a direct comic storyline, but the Iron Man movies have been some of the absolute best ones because they got it. They got who the character was, and then they told a story about that. I think that's really what Tom Holland's Spider-Man has been. A lot of people have been very dismissive of all the tech that Tom has had, but I think they've really gotten to the essence of Peter Parker as a character with Tom Holland better than they have with some of the other characters. So for me, if you get the essence, I don't care as much about the details as I do about the heart of the story. So we've had an earthquake. Ooh. And I was at work and there was an earthquake that hit the area. And so I came home and it looked like just like mass. There were figures all over the ground, broken heads. You know, the guys who took a nosedive from some of those top shelves, that's a pretty good drop. So we did have a little trauma with an earthquake.
Yeah.
And
I would be putting some like why am I blanking on this word?
You're like screening or like a flood to them. Yeah. And then we had the flood. You know, that was terrible when Hurricane Helene hit the East Coast. We were probably water up to about right here. I mean, up to about mid shin. It was kind of funny because the whale was actually on the ground at that time. And when I came down to check and see the damage, the whale was just floating all around the secret lounge, just kind of making laps in the water.
Did you take a video of that?
I did, actually. Yeah, I did. It's kind of funny. Yeah, I'll send that clip over. But it took quite a lot of time to kind of clean up after the flood. But luckily, I mean, it's really just, it's plastic.